I'm super excited to be here this morning in Nantes and talk about DevUx, what it is, and spread the love between designers and developers, finally. So yeah, I am a lead developer at a company called Theodo, and my job is to help my client build products. And actually, a year ago, I was on this project, and we were building a chat service. So the project starts, and the designer sends me all the mockups. And actually, I'm stuck at the first feature because I'm supposed to display that chat bubble, but I don't have the icon. So I ask the designer for the icon. And this is what he sends me. And I cannot work with this blue background. So I ask for the icon only. And then I wait, because the designer is not working at the same office as I am, and he's not answering on Slack. So an hour later, I get a nice PNG. But then I remember that the colors of the chat must be customizable, and I cannot work with a PNG, so I ask for an SVG. And then I wait again, because he's not available. And 2 hours later, finally, I get that SVG. So after all this back and forth about a stupid icon, I'm finally able to finish my feature. And yeah, you must feel the frustration in my voice when I tell this story. But at that time, I had so many things to worry about. I had 2 back-end, 2 front-ends, a whole team to manage and to train. So at that point, I was thinking, it's really not the way I want it to be working with, when I'm doing integration. And then I took a step back, and I remember that actually I had a friend who was a designer. So I reached out to her and asked her for advice. And so that friend is France Wang. She was a lead designer with a company that we were used to working with. Today she's an entrepreneur. And yes, France is not my imaginary friend. She is very much alive. And she made this presentation with me. She couldn't be here today to present it, but all her spirit is in this presentation. So when I reached out to France, she was actually struggling on her own project. So she was building this mobile app, and they had a usual sign-up and login form. So she designed the sign-up form and sent it to the devs. And actually, afterwards, the developer asked her for the login form. But she's like, aren't they the same? Like, can't you work with that sign-up form? But then they insisted, and she ended up doing it and sending it to them. But yeah, I'm sure you can understand why France was frustrated at that time, because if you have a look, the 2 mockups are quite identical in the structure and in the behavior. So it's just a bit of wording that changes. And for France, it was very frustrating because, well, basically she felt like she was being asked to do meaningless work. Like the developers were not seeing the product as a whole, but were just building pages as they came. So yeah, obviously there was a gap between designers and developers when we start talking, but then what we realized is that by understanding each other, well, we would actually start enjoying working together. And well, this is how this whole story about DevUx started. We started exploring the possibilities of having designers and developers collaborate and actually enjoy it. And so we iterated with our projects, and we experimented with other teams. And a year later, we were able to better shape our idea of DevUx. And well, it's a bit similar to DevOps in the sense that it's a set of practices to build better product faster. But it's also a culture to bring developers and designers together and to enjoy working together. More concretely, we've categorized 4 levels of DevUx collaboration. Ground zero is dysfunction, obviously. Then you move on to level 1, the basics. Then level 2, efficiency. And finally, the holy grail, symbiosis. And so to illustrate all those levels, I'm going to tell you the story of different projects at different stages. First, a bit of context about the projects. Most of the projects, they have a product team with designers and developers working hand in hand with the product owner that sets the roadmap and the product vision. Around this team, you have stakeholders such as the CEO or someone from marketing or from legal or even someone from another product or another project team. And so in our cases, as we are working in a service company, we have limited time and projects last from 6 weeks to 6 months. For a first example, the team is working on a food tech app, and the designer is actually a freelance that has limited time on the project. And so he starts by designing the whole product beforehand and ships it to the team. The product owner is very happy with it, and development starts. But actually, a week later, the CEO sees the app, and he's very unhappy with how it looks like. So he makes the team start over again, and the designer has to come up with new design. And the developers need to scrap all their work and try to keep busy with the backend, while the designer finds something that suits the CEO's vision and the product owner's vision. And literally, it took 3 weeks and 17 attempts to have them both agree on something that they liked. So actually, at the time, the time of the designer was up on the project, and he had to leave. And that's when, obviously, the developers were like, hey, I'm missing this icon, and I don't find it with the things that the designer sent us. They also had questions about some behaviors. And since it's not the product owner's job to find the right answers, they didn't know what to do. And well, that's when developers do what we call best effort. They just try to do something that's not too ugly, that hopefully works. So what went wrong here? The first problem was when the CEO had the whole team start all over again. And that happens usually when the process has not been set clearly, and when there are many people involved in the decision process. So what we try to do now, whenever we start a project, is really to clearly define each member's responsibility and what are the key moments to synchronize with each other. So for instance, here you have simple workflow of just product development. The product owner defines the needs and then defines the feature with the UX. Then the designer creates the mockup. They have them validated with the product owner, who then describe the task and plan them with the developer. Then there's development and then validation again. And so here, what was missing was having the CEO validate the mockups with the product owner to have a moment where they could synchronize so that, well, when development starts, they're actually on the right path the first time. A second thing that you can do is involve the designer during the planning just to make sure that the mockups are ready, or even if you have any questions, so that they can answer them. The second problem was obviously when developers were missing assets. And that happens because what usually happens is that developers do the mockup, ship it, and don't really do the follow-up. And actually what designers need to understand is that mockups are not development-ready material. So they need to define everything that has to be shipped with it. And to centralize all that information, they can use design handoff tools. So this is an example of a list that our designers work with when they do mockups. Basically, it's a list of things to think about when they have static contents, the different behaviors that they can have, and the common edge cases that can happen when they design mockups. We really like using design handoff tools because they, well, as a developer, they help you inspect the mockups and the structure. So you get the information about the spacing, you get code snippets that you can reuse, and it's also a place where you can comment and discuss about a mockup to just make sure you fully understand that you've catched all the edge cases. And there are many solutions for design handoff tools. I hope you're using one, but if you're not, France prefers Zeppelin, and I'm currently working with Figma, and it does the job very well. And so the final problem that happened on this project was that the team were left on their own to find out some behaviors about the product. And that happens because we cannot anticipate everything up front. And so what we do now on all our projects is really synchronize the roadmaps of developers and designers to have them work next to each other. And so that starts when you begin a project, you need to anticipate and give a heads up to the designers so that they can have the time to prepare the first mockup so that the team then can start working on them. So give them time to do UX research, give them time to design their design system and create the first mockups that the team is going to work on. You can also have a developer working along just to anticipate any blocking technical dependencies. And when all of this is ready, you're ready to iterate on the project and have development starts. And so during those iterations, just make sure that for given sprints, the designer will be helping the developers working on a certain feature. They will be testing the feature that has been shipped previously, and they will be also preparing the following feature that will come up in the next sprint. If we summarize what we've learned from this first project, is that first, during product definition, it's essential to clarify each member's responsibility and define the key moments where everyone will synchronize. During mockup definition, really define what needs to be delivered alongside the mockups and centralize everything in design handoff tools. And finally, make sure that the roadmaps of developers and designers are synchronized. And if you've done all that, then, that's the usual workflow that you'll have at that stage. And yeah, if you've done all that, then welcome to level 1. You've got the basics, yay. So now what happens with the projects at level 1? Here we have a team that is working on a travel agency tool, and the feature they're working on is to display a map with the trip itinerary. This is the design that the designer comes up with, but actually when it goes live, it doesn't really look well. It's not very clear what's the trip, and so the team has to roll back. This is the second attempt at the design, this time with numbers for each place that the user will visit. But actually, when developers start working on it again, they're stuck because they don't know how to display the information when for instance, day 5 happens at the same place as day 12, because itineraries can loop, and that was not taken into account in the mockups. So the designer decides in a fuss to put the information in a tooltip. And as the developer was very eager to finish the feature, they improvised on the look and feel of the tooltip on hover and on click. And actually, I'm not sure that the designer was really happy about it, but he went for it because he also wanted to ship the value to the users as soon as possible. So what are the new challenges that arose at that stage? First of all, the designer did not work on real sets of data, and the consequence was that they missed use cases and edge cases. So really the thing that we want to do on all our mockup now is provide real data to the designer, and for that we can involve developers, and they can also give tech insights because they know the app, they know the data, so they can tell you all about this. For instance, if a designer creates this mockup and doesn't ask the developers about technical insights and feasibility, well, for instance, I'm a developer, and I could just ask, yeah, you know, actually, you want to display that project list, but the API we're getting those projects on, they don't give us any image, so we can't display any image on this. Or if there were image, what happens if one project doesn't have an image? What happens when the project name is very long? I don't know how this design will behave at that point. It's the same when you integrate third-party integrations. If you want to do payment with Stripe, for example, you need to make sure that the designer knows what is possible in terms of design. Can we design inputs like this? Are these all the fields that are required to have a successful payment? Is there anything missing or not? And yeah, by the way, what we want to do and what we've banned from mockups is the lorem ipsum placeholder, because you cannot know what the real content is. You cannot challenge the wording, which is very essential for UX. So now we really want to try to have on all mockup real content, and that will give us a better idea of what the product is gonna look like. And yes, integrating real data doesn't have to be painful for the designer. This is a tool that France uses on Sketch. It's basically a plugin where you can set up an API or a set of data, and then she can just take this data and use it on her mockup. So to display a list, she'll have dynamic content, and that will take her a few clicks. There are also solutions if you use Figma for your mockups. So don't worry, and don't hesitate to share it with your designers if they don't use those. And yeah, if you want to involve developers to challenge technical feasibility, it doesn't have to be a meeting. You don't have to be stuck in a room to do it. You can just discuss using any tool that you want. It's easier if it's directly on the mockup. So here, for instance, we're on Figma, and we're discussing about the error states of a login form. The second problem that happened on this project is that developers were missing states and behaviors of components. What can also happen is that you don't know what should happen responsive-wise. And so what we do now on our project is really provide a style guide for behaviors and states of components, and also define all the breakpoints of our application to make sure we have the layouts for all the screen sizes. And what I really like about the style guide is that it sets a contract of UI between the designers and the developers so that they can speak a common language. So listing all the colors that you can have on an app that just prevents you from having 50 shades of blue on your project. Defining the typography styles, defining the conventions on margins and spacing, on shapes and shadows. listing everything, all the states of a button that will prevent you from having 5 different mockups with just the button changing color. And it's centralizing all the information on one component. So if the designer has designed input, forms, and basically a whole design system, then they can share it with the developers as soon as they can. Another thing that I liked when I'm working on complex feature is to have a user flow that explains how the screen, how you navigate between screens. So here we have a video upload workflow. And so the user uploads a mockup, then they go to, they upload the video, sorry. The video is being processed. There's some waiting time. They can quit at any time. And when the video has been processed, then either it's a success and you go to the preview page, or there was an error and you go back to the upload phase. So this is something that France drew in a couple of minutes, and she just sends it as she sends a screen. And that helps me understand how we're going to build the feature. When it comes to layouts, this is also something that France provided me on a project. That way I can understand how, what component should shrink and what component should become larger, depending on the screen size. And yes, it's essential that the designer shares all of those with the developers, but actually what's even more important is that developers know how to use these tools and integrate them in their routine. Otherwise, there'll still be lots of back and forth between designers and developers, and also, designs might not even match. So really what we've tried to do, I talked about the style guide and all those variables about colors, typography, etc. What we want to do and what we have on our project is, a style sheet where we define all those variables to centralize all the styles on our applications. And to make sure that all developers use those values, we use a linter. So this is a stylint. It's a really cool style linter that will give you warnings and errors if you start using hard-coded values in your CSS. It works with CSS in JS as well. And here's an example of the configuration that we have on our project. Basically, it says that we want to ban any hard-coded value for colors, fonts, and also it helps us bring up the quality of our CSS so that when we need to edit something, it's not a pain and we can do it easily. So what are the takeouts from this second project? During product definition, just make sure that you provide real data for basis of design. And you can involve the developer to give you some insights. During mockup creation and development, just make sure that designers and developers use a common style guide, a common language, and that you've defined all the break points and for your different size of screens. And if you've done all that, then welcome to level 2. You're going faster already. You've gotten rid of most of the friction points. Yeah, that's a great achievement, and you'll feel better within your team when you've reached that. And you can actually do more. So what happens at level 2 now? It's a project that we've worked with France on. And we were working for a market leader, and we were building a tool for developers. And there was this very long documentation to integrate an SDK. And what France suggested is that we had, when the user scrolls, you had the menu with the different chapter, and when the user scrolls, then the section would highlight, well, the right section would be highlighted. And the product owner was very happy about this feature, but actually, given the technical context and the time we had, I had to say, we don't have the time to do it, it will not fit in our roadmap. So the product owner was a bit disappointed, but he went with it because he wanted us to ship the product. And, well, France was not crying, but almost. Also, the product owner was very picky about the design, and he would give us feedback when something was not quite right about, well, the line heights, about the alignments, or even the color contrasts. And each time he gave us a small feedback, then either France or I had to do some rework and create a new ticket to integrate to the next iteration. And there was a bit of back and forth around those. But yeah, our team was quite efficient already. We were very reactive whenever there was something that we could improve. And what could we have done actually better? So the first thing that you've noticed is that famous, yeah, it's too complex, it's not going to fit, we're not going to do that. And that happens because France made the design, she had it approved by the product owner, and then she came to us to say, hey, now do that. And actually, well, some behaviors are complex to design, and if you don't anticipate the technical complexity, then it might be shut down but because of the roadmap and the time constraints. So really, designers can involve developers when they do their mockup to find solutions together. For instance, this is a feature that France was working on more recently. And she was working on a price filter with 2 sliders. And actually, when the 2 sliders were close to each other, the labels did not show properly. So what she had envisioned at the first place was a solution like this. And she decided to go to this developer desk and just ask them, hey, what do you think about this? Do you think that that's going to be easy to do? And actually, the developer said, yeah, no, if I need to take all the edge cases about where to place the label, depending on how close they are, then I think it doesn't bring enough value to the project, and maybe we should do something simpler like this, just having them overlap with the background so that the most important information displays. And actually, it just took them 5 minutes to do a quick iteration together, and they find a solution that they were happy about. And yeah, this involving the developer in your design doesn't only mean about the UI, it can also be about the UX. So remember that user flow about the video upload I told you about? Actually, it was a bit more complex than what I presented earlier. So the thing was that the video processing was a bit long, and we didn't want to block the user at that stage. We wanted them to be able to go further on the process while they were waiting for the video to process. So Frost sat down with the developer that was working on this feature, and she tried to understand, yeah, what's the phase that's really blocking? And the developer explained, yeah, so when you upload the video, there's that time when the video is being sent to the server, and that's when you really don't want the user to quit the page. So she designed an uploading phase where the user could not quit the screen, but then there was the processing phase, and that's a non-blocking step. So she added a button for the user to just go to the next step while the video is processing. And then in the menu, she displays the status of the video being uploaded, whether it's processing, there's a small loader, And then whenever the user comes back, they can see the status. If it's a success, then he sees this green tick. And when he clicks on that menu, he's redirected to the preview of the video. And if there was an error, then the user is clear about what happened and what he has to do now. And so the second thing that happened is that, well, the PO had very small improvements around the app to do. And we had lots of back and forth around those. So what we've done by the end of the project was actually having France and I or another developer sit down together to fix the small things together and polish the app. So we call that like a small integration workshop. And yeah, what can help designers and developers working better together is also having them share common design pattern. So yeah, sitting down together with a designer is actually helpful, especially if you're working around accessibility. So if you need to define the right keyboard navigation, it's easier to do it on a computer and just test it. So have the designer and the developer sitting down together, just try out some things and kind of pair program together. That will help you define the right navigation. About sharing common patterns, well, as a developer, if I know that on mobile I need to be keyboard aware, I will know that the buttons should always be displayed and not hidden by the keyboard. So for every form, I will know that this is the behavior that we want without having the designer telling me, hey, yeah, look, I did this mockup and you need to understand that now buttons have to scroll up with the keyboard. So it really is integration at that point. And on the other side, if the designer understands how we build components, then they can actually have that reflect on their mockups. So for instance, here, we have 2 columns, and as a developer, I want to know the padding and the gap that's between those 2 columns. And I can only know that if the boxes that the designer creates are like the widest size that it can get. And that way I get the right padding. If they do just text boxes the size of the text, then I wouldn't be able to know what's the gap between those 2. And actually, if we think about it, the designer creates components, and we do create components in our code. So what if you could actually share the same structure between presentational components, layout components, business components, and your pages? If we start designing the same way, designers and developers, then we could really go a step further and well, do not do the same work twice. We could name our components together, and the handoff will be even more smoother. And so I've worked on this Figma plugin during a hackathon at Dashlane for 2 days. And actually, the idea was that on Figma, you've got all these local styles, colors, and fonts. And actually, what the designer could do is use the mockup, the plugin with small configuration, review the colors that he changed comparing to the code base, and actually with a click, just creating a pull request on the repo of the code, and actually just share this pull request with the developers, having their contact information. And so the developers just had to review the request and approve it, so that whenever he wants to change, whenever designer wants to change the colors on their design, they don't need to ask the developer to change it. They can just automate it. And yes, it's about automation. If we start talking the same language, designing together, we can really start automatize that painful and not very valuable step. And so at Theodore, a team started working on a tool to actually create components. So the designer was creating the mockups and his components. Well, they're doing it on Sketch. They design it and they split it as developer would do. And then they can just export them on a web platform, and on that platform, developers can just go there, copy the code, whether it's in Vue or React, and use them on their projects. And that speeds up the integration process. So at level 2, if you want to, well, be even more efficient, what you can do is during mockup definition, have the designer involve developers when they create their mockup to find smart solutions together. You can have the designer sit next to the developer to polish the app and make it consistent and even better for the users. And you can have designers and developers share common patterns. And so at that point, this is the kind of workflow that you can have. So if you see, there are lots of moments where designers and developers can sync. And yes, if you've done all that, then you're amazing. You've reached the final level, which is symbiosis. Welcome to level 3. And so now that you've understand the different levels of DevUx collaboration, how can you actually spark this DevUx culture around your team? Well, first, define your goal. Define where you're standing now and where you want to go. If you have a very siloed situation, if your team doesn't get along, then just stick to the basics. If you've got lots of delays, lots of back and forth, focus on efficiency. And if you have very high UX expectation or you just want to have fun with your team, try to reach symbiosis. So now you have a more practical vision of what DevUx is and what it could be actually on your team. Yeah, by the way, this is the logo we've designed with France for DevUx. It was really fun to design it together and animate it with CSS. I've learned lots of things, actually, on CSS animations. And yeah, the idea is that developers and designers are the same, because it's the same shape. It just depends on the point of view that you have. Because DevUx, there's a word in the definition that I haven't insisted on, and that word is culture. DevUx is really a culture, and it's all about the mindset. You need to think as a team and act like a team player. When is the last time you had lunch with your team? When is the last time you had drinks with your designers or with your product owners? Because it's really during those team-building moments that you're able to build empathy and understand each other's motivation. So, yeah, is there any designer in the room? Cool, because France has a message for you, and that's what she learned throughout her projects, is first that development, mockups are not development-ready material. You need to ask the developer what they need to be able to work. And developers are really good at spotting edge cases, spotting errors, because they're used to debugging stuff and seeing the different things that could go wrong. So do not hesitate to ask them whenever you do your mockups, so that you can get insights on which case to spot. And finally, because it's frustrating both for designers and developers to shut down an idea of a feature, yeah, it's good if you can create solutions together and have technical insights when you design. And now my message to all the developers in this room, is to keep in mind that the designer cannot guess what you need to work, so you need to tell them. If you have any questions on a design, then just don't try to sort it on your own and take lots of time. Just call your designer, and they are used to finding solutions to these problems, so do not hesitate. Secondly, keep in mind that details are here for a reason. The designer puts their heart in their design, so follow them as much as you can, and if you have any doubts, then stick to the style guide because it's the source of truth and it's what makes the app consistent. And finally, and I think it's the most important, show that you care about the product so that the product owner or the designer will involve you when they make decisions, and that will make your job even more interesting. And now I think that you have the mindset to start building DevUx. So yeah, actually be ready to build relationships. So recently I had product owners coming to me because they were struggling on their project. So it's been a year, they're struggling, they have lots of back and forth with the designers, and they're wasting a lot of time. And I could really feel their frustration when they came to me, and yeah, they were asking for my help to just understand what was going wrong. So they've tried to improve their process, they've tried to give real data to the designers, but they wouldn't use it, and they will still have lots of back and forth. So I listened to them, and I tried to understand what was going wrong here. Can you guess at all what was missing there? So when I heard the product owner talking, they were very motivated on improving the things, on having the designers do the right thing with their mockups. But actually all the challenges that they made to the designer were taken personally by the designer, so they felt attacked, and that's why they didn't react to those challenges. And that resonated with a book that I read. Actually, yeah, this book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, was very helpful anytime I had a bit of struggle within a team. And basically what Patrick Leoncini explains in that book is that in order for your team to function and to be efficient, you need to go over 5 different steps. And what I believe in order to create a DevUx culture is that you need at least trust and constructive conflict. So how can you build that trust and start having constructive discussions? Well, first of all, you need to break the ice. Just go say hi to your developer, to your designer. When I joined a mission on Dashlane, actually the designer came to me. He said, "Hi, my name is Clément. I'm from Nantes. Where are you from? What do you do? What do you like? What do you dislike?" And yeah, we started building a relationship that helped us work together and tell each other things. So we also had some icebreaker games as a team, some team building moments where we could just have lunch together or have a drink together. And when you've broken the ice, it's easier to start building trust. And to build trust, you need to build empathy. You need to show that you're vulnerable. So share your aspirations, share your motivations, just what you love about your job and what are your biggest challenges or pain points. And once you build that trust, then you can maintain it by sharing ideas, sharing the tools that you want to try using, sharing any news around DevUx, attend conferences together, just keep on sharing this good vibe. So, well, actually, that makes your job more interesting and I am very happy now when I do this with my colleagues, because it makes my work way more richer. And so to share DevUx within our network, what we've done with France was organizing monthly DevUx drinks. The idea was just to have designers and developers sit down together, chill out, have some wine and cheese, and share about everything and anything. And the great things we learned, for instance, I heard a developer say, yeah, I feel more proud about the product I build when I work with a designer, because I'm a developer, I suck at design, and if I do this on my own, then I know that it's not going to be great for the users. So I love working with designers. And I think as a designer, you're very happy to hear that, because that comforts you in the value that you bring every day on your work. The thing that surprised me and that I enjoyed was hearing a designer say, when I work with developer, it makes me more thorough with my work. And that was a relief, because so far I thought that I was just being annoying, asking questions to designers and having all of those requests. And yeah, other exchanges that you have, it's really learning about how each other work. So for instance, we had a designer say, yeah, I have lots of repetitive tasks, but actually I don't know about all the shortcuts. So it takes a bit of time to do those changes. And as developer, we know that we can be even more productive if we learn the shortcuts on our code editor. So yeah, it's easier for us to encourage designers learning those shortcuts and having their work less painful, actually. And yeah, on that note, I think that sums up everything that I wanted to share to you about DevUx. I think now you have enough to start a conversation and start sparking the DevUx culture. If you need any information, we've created a website, devux.tech, where you can have explain again what are the different levels of collaborations, what are the tools that you can use to improve your collaboration. We've also set up a Slack if you want to join and share things about what you do, what you like and dislike. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, message me in French or in English, both are fine. And again, thanks a lot for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.